Welcome in to another edition of the JMU Sports News Podcast. I'm Bennett Conlon, joined by Jack Fitzpatrick. And Jack, the Dukes are 1-0.
Your voice is also 0-1 because what a voice crack. But really going back to our roots here, recording only, podcast only this week after the Dukes took down Charlotte. Kind of different. I'm not used to just purely recording and going straight audio, but we're here. Dukes are 1-0. What a game it was. And that's going to be the primary focus of today's podcast, kind of breaking down that game, sharing our thoughts, maybe a little preview of Gardner-Webb, but I don't think we got to talk too much about the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's a Super Bowl for both teams. Allegedly, they should win this game by 1 million points.
Bob Chesney has been saying the Super Bowl line a lot.
He's trying to keep them focused, I suppose, but I don't think Gardner-Webb's very good. They lost to Wofford in week 1.
By 1 point.
Yeah, they blew a fourth quarter lead. They lost a lot, though. They had a really good team last year and lost a lot from that team.
Trey Lamb went to ETSU. So, their star young head coach gets poached by an FBS program. With him goes 24 transfers, I believe. Ja'Kai Young being one of them.
That defense was crazy that they had last year. They sent a bunch of guys to Power 5s.
Yeah, and G5s. But so, I mean, that team's just been pillaged. So there's not a lot to dive into with that game. So we'll focus mostly on the Alonzo Barnett era restarting in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah, I think a surprise to me.
A surprise indeed. But before we dive into the Alonzo Barnett era, we got to let you guys know that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share at $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here. That's Bet Online. We also are very pumped to bring on a new sponsor for the podcast this football season. We're bringing on Cinnamon Bear. Super pumped to have Cinnamon Bear, a bakery right across the street from the Atlantic Union Bank Center. You can find them at 600 East University Boulevard in Harrisonburg. Fantastic little atmosphere, great bakery, great coffee, deli, everything you could want. It's a great breakfast spot. It's a great lunch spot. Cinnamon Bear, we are pumped to have them on board as a sponsor for the 2024 JMU football season. And they'll be our presenting sponsor for News or Snooze. News or Snooze makes its triumphant return this episode in a little bit. That is sponsored by Cinnamon Bear. Surprise of the weekend. Was it a surprise? Do you think it was a surprise? Alonzo Barnett taking the field as QB1 for JMU against Charlotte on August 31st down in the Queen City.
I was a little surprised. Not surprised as last year, but still a little surprised. And then through most of the first half, I was stunned at what was happening. I was having Bucknell flashbacks. It was a weird game, but he found his footing, looked pretty good. He is very mobile. His deep ball is incredible. I think they just need a little more consistency moving forward on some of those short to intermediate throws, which seems like an easy thing to find from him.
Looking back, though, rewatching the game, it really wasn't as bad, I think, as us sitting in the stands may have thought it was. I think part of it was, oh my goodness, there's an interception, which looking back on the tape, kind of surprised he didn't get the offside call because
it was offsides. Yeah,
he did jump, but he didn't get the flag. So he just threw it up against the greatest corner in the American Athletic Conference who made a good play on the ball. So that one, you see that happen. But as a fan, you're like, oh no, Bucknell, flashbacks, PTSD of it all. His strip sack, in the moment, you're like, oh my goodness, he can't read pressure. Then watching it on the ESPN Plus broadcast, you're like, oh, I see why he was strip sacked. The defensive end got into the backfield in under a second and just clobbered him. But yeah, he finished the game averaging around 20 yards per completion. He went 10 for 18, 2 touchdowns. That pick had a 73-yard pass to Amarian Dollison, which was amazing. George Pettaway, I believe it was a 50-yard-ish pass to George
33,
Pettaway. How long?
33, I think.
Oh,
It felt a lot longer because it was the back of the end zone.
thank you for making me sound not dumb. It was like a 50-yarder. It was actually 20 yards less than that. But he looked really solid. And running-wise, he led the team. I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing. He led the team in rushing with 89 yards on 9 attempts.
Yeah.
He gained 101 yards, but with his 2 sacks, that factors into the rushing game. He finishes the game with 89 rush yards.
He had like -2 rushing yards in the first half. And then he had I think it was like 6 carries for 91 yards in the second half, which is wild. He was explosive. Like
Very much so.
Yeah, which is all right. Like we see the ceiling a little bit now with him. I would agree that I was a little concerned about the rest of the running game.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that now?
I don't know. I mean, we could go there. We could talk about the positives because they did win by 23.
They did win by 23, but I think we're known for being the negative people. We'll focus on the positives. The run game is something though to keep an eye on. If they struggle against Gardner Webb, it's time to hit the panic alarm. Charlotte's front 7, Charlotte specifically their defensive line, were a bunch of dudes. Like Stone Handy was wreaking havoc. I think in the trenches, Charlotte honestly may have had the advantage. And I think that's why we saw the run game really struggle early. They did start to find their rhythm. Io finished with 41 yards. He did lose 10 yards in the game. He gained 51, but his net was 41. I mean, there were times he didn't even have an opportunity to hit the line of scrimmage. The guys were just in the backfield. So we'll see how that progresses. You got Gardner Webb, a bye week, and then a bye week, and then UNC. So you don't really have a big test coming for another 3 weeks. So a lot of time.
Is that good or is that bad? I would have loved them to play like Ball State this weekend, where it's like an FBS team, a little bit better than Gardner Webb. Maybe learn some more. I feel like we're not going to know much going into Carolina.
I think I'm not really too bummed about this because I think this gives you a really good opportunity to find confidence and find a rhythm. And if something really is wrong that Gardner Webb can exploit, then you know exactly what to focus on in the bye week going into UNC. So I'm not too upset about it.
That's fair. That's fair. I will say, reiterating what you said, Charlotte's defensive front is awesome. Like that defense, I think, has a chance to be one of the better units in the American. That defensive line might be one of the best in the group of 5. Like those are big, athletic dudes that are really disruptive. So part of the reason I think JMU's offensive line wasn't great is because they were going up against some men, some grown men.
According to Biff Poggi, too, I think of their like 8 or 9 starters that were injured and didn't play, 3 of them were on the defensive line.
Well, that's going to be a frightening unit. If they can figure out anything offensively, I think this win will look better as the season goes on. It reminds me a little bit of UVA last year, where UVA was like 3-9, but they were like way better than that 3 wins indicated. I think Charlotte might have a tough year, but they're, I think, a tougher out, especially in Charlotte, than most people maybe anticipated.
And that's going to be the most raucous atmosphere the 49ers have this season.
And it was a good one.
Great atmosphere. I mean, that they really made me sound smart. I was very excited about that because I'd been hyping up that atmosphere, hyping up that defense, and both hit. It was funny because going into the game, I was like, it's going to be a tough game. It's going to take them a while to gel. It's always tough on the road week 1, especially in a raucous atmosphere against a Ryan Osborne defense. And then like the first play happens, it wasn't a perfect touchdown. And I was like, well, the season's over. It's done. And it's like, why sober me and non-fan in attendance me going into that game, I was like, okay, it's going to take some time. It may be a slugfest. It may not look pretty at times, but a win is a win. And then literally the first play, I was like, this is over. We stink. Stone Handy pile drove Io into the ground. I was like, this is over. Or George Pettaway, whichever one it was.
Yeah, he Pettaway picked up and slammed. It helped settle me in, temper my expectations after the first half. That didn't go great. I was like, all right, like they're still gelling. Like, let's cool all the college football playoff, Sun Belt championship dreams and like let the season unfold a little bit. In the second half, they played really well, looked really good. And I think fans should still be a little bit patient with it. Let's see what happens at Gardner Webb. Let's see how they develop in that game. And then a bye week. Yeah, I think the Carolina game's winnable. Carolina lost their starting quarterback. They looked average against Minnesota. I think JMU's defense looked pretty good in week 1. Although I still don't totally know what exactly is there because they rotated like 84 bodies in. But I think we'll learn more as the season unfolds. I do like the depth defensively and offensively.
Yeah. I want to touch on Dylan Morris, and I want to go back to the platoon swaps, the hockey
Sure.
subs we were seeing. Shout out Dylan Morris. In the second half, he apparently, according to Bob Chesney, called that play that was the Omarion Dollison touchdown, the up and out or the in and go. You lose the QB1 job, and then you're giving the QB who is starting over you the plays to win the game. That's pretty cool.
That was cool, man. That's an unselfish thing to sort of help out your teammate when you could have just hoped that maybe you struggled and you got the starting job.
Yeah. I mean, very easily could have done that.
So I thought that was really cool. And that's another great throw. I mean, Barnett's deep ball is legit. So I think finding ways to continue. I mean, he created some really just explosive plays, right? Where he averaged 20 yards of completion and 10 yards of rush, basically. Like, good Lord. I mean, the talent is there, obviously. We got a flash of like, oh, here's why he wins every camp battle he's ever in. So if they can build that confidence, that's huge. And I do think Dylan Morris, his experience could be a pretty big factor in Alonzo maturing as a quarterback on the field. Off the field, he already seems pretty mature with like his answers to things.
Very, very mature. And you got to think, in theory, if this run game gets going to even 70% of the level that we were expecting coming into the season, that's going to draw safeties in. That's going to put more bodies into the box to slow down the run game. It then becomes a pick your poison type of offense where if you stack the box to slow down the run game, you're going to have one-on-one coverage on the outside that Alonzo Barnett can exploit. Yeah. If you decide to not stack the box and you want to defend the deep ball, play some cover two, some too high, then that's going to open up the run game. So if the run game can get going, I think that is the real, and I sound like a 1990s coach talking about you run to establish the pass. But if they can, Mickey Matthews, exactly, who will be leading the Go Dukes chant this Saturday as they honor the 2004 national championship team. But if you can run, it will unlock, I think, a lot of the potential that Alonzo Barnett has.
Yes. Do we think they're going to be able to run? Or do we think how much of that was Charlotte being like really, really good defensively? How much of that was this offensive line hasn't really shown it as a like dominant run blocking group?
I'm really worried, kind of like PTSD from the Bucknell game that I was going through with Alonzo. I'm kind of going through PTSD for last year. Felt like, and I kept saying it over the offseason until about August hit. And then I changed my tune entirely. And I was like, this running game is going to be so good. I think I'm really worried we bought the snake oil.
Charlotte had a lot of tackles for loss.
That's what worries me.
A lot of tackles for loss. They had, let me see. Let's do some math here.
As you drink your tea.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think. 9 tackles for loss is crazy.
Most of them coming in the first half, though.
Yeah, they were getting after it. Chesney said they adjusted their blocks a little bit, their scheme to create better blocking angles, I guess. Chesney's interesting because he doesn't like to give a lot of like schematic things of what they're doing. So he's like, we made a little tweak and I thought it was better. And then he's like, with kickoff coverage next week, we do a little tweak. I won't say what it is and we're going to be great. It's like, all right, guess I'll take your word for it on your little tweaks.
Kickoff coverage did worry me. Delvin talked about it on To the House,
yes,
which you can find every Monday night in your podcast feeds and on YouTube. But he was talking about how the kickoff coverage kind of worried him.
Chesney, interestingly, told Dave Riggert after the game he thought Charlotte was getting away with like massive holding penalties on kickoff.
Of course he would.
So whether that's true or not, I'd have to go back and look. But it sounded like some of that he thought was maybe not their kickoff coverage and more so like missed holdings. But you're probably going to see that.
Chesney's a very good players coach because in his interview with Dave Riggert too, he was talking about like the slow start for Alonzo Barnett where he goes 1 for 6. He was like, Cam Ross, I don't know if he actually said this specifically, but he was like, he only had one overthrow on the strip sack. He would have hit a guy for a huge gain. On the interception, it was an offsides and he would have hit him for a touchdown if it wasn't an offside. And it's like, wow, we're really just like giving him the best possible outcome on these plays that didn't have good outcomes.
He is a big players coach.
But that probably is a huge help for overall confidence.
I think so. I think like we got a chance to see what Barnett looked like with a coach backing him, but I don't know how much of that was like Cignetti didn't back him and how much of that is like they play Gardner-Webb next week, where last year week 2 is UVA. Like you needed a quarterback to be ready to go. So I don't really blame Cignetti last year for the decision that he made. And I wrote a bit about this on JMUSportsNews.com. But I will blame him for how he handled like changing to McLeod from Barnett, where like he kind of roasted Barnett. And I don't think that was valuable, where I feel like Chesney would never do that publicly, which helps players' confidence. Like if he moves on from somebody at a position, or if he rotates, and you saw he rotated a lot of Joseph Simmons at left tackle for Jesse Rammel in the second half. He's not going to go and like blast the play of a player in a post-game interview, which is probably good.
Yeah, probably very good. You mentioned the rotations. The defensive side had some wild rotations. I don't know if you noticed it, but I don't know if, as a listener, if you go back and rewatch this game, it was quite wild. What I've never seen a coach do this. Full linebacker platoon swaps. It would be Jacob Dobbs and Trent Hendrick out there, the quote-unquote starting linebackers. They'd come out for a play or two. Gannon Weathersby and Taurus Jones would come in and play some. Ray Scott would come in and play some. And then they would switch. The cornerbacks early, they didn't do it much in the second half, but in the first half, Chauncey Logan would be out there with Justin Eaglin, the starting cornerbacks. And then all of a sudden it would be Jordan Taylor and Terrence Spence. And you're like, what? This is cornerback 3 and 4. But in Chesney's mind, they're all starter level players, and he's rotating them in. And he said in the Dave Riggert interview that he's never had a team, or the team said that they've never finished a game and felt like they could go out and play another quarter.
Yeah, he was talking about how he felt like they had a whole half left in them.
And I was just like, oh, I mean, it looked like it helped in the second half.
So I would agree.
The second half, they looked fresh, and you could tell the running game really wasn't working all game. And then in the fourth quarter, they just kind of lean on the running game and score those last 2 touchdowns, one of which Biff Poggi wasn't too happy about. But they started to be able to lean. Well, we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Softy.
They started to lean on Charlotte a lot more, and you saw that conditioning and the fresh legs really come into play later in the game. Now, I will say there were times that those platoon swaps may have hurt the team. That huge run on 3rd and 25 happened when the backups, or the quote-unquote backups, the second platoon was in.
Jacob Dobbs, Trent Hendrick, both off the field on that play, right?
Yes.
That didn't make a lot of sense to me, where like you're probably getting off the field after that play and you're going to have a chance to run an offensive drive and they'll rest. Wouldn't you want your 2 best linebackers on the field? So like there were times where I totally didn't get it. I also think they're going to need to be maybe a little more creative at times with, like, it felt like there were times where like Logan Kyle was on the field and it's like, oh, it's pass to tight end Logan Kyle, who's pass catcher. Like, I think they maybe need to switch that up where it's like, oh, Gannon Weathersby is in. He's probably going to end up covering. Like there was one where they're early in the game where they showed blitz with Taurus Jones and Gannon Weathersby. And I was like, they're going to blitz Jones and drop Weathersby back because that's what they're good at. And that's exactly what they did. So I think mixing that up as the season goes on, tendency breaking will be important. But yeah, like I was definitely skeptical of the rotating so many players, the rotations they were using. But shout out to Chesney because that made a ton of sense given the heat, humidity, week 1. Like they wore them down. They did not play that well, I didn't think, but they hit explosives and they wore down like an American Athletic Conference team on the road in week 1 with all this roster turnover and won by 23, despite probably not playing that well. Like that was very much a JMU standard is the standard cliche stuff of just like, yeah, this is a good football program. And they're just going to outlast you. And it's a good way to use the depth that they brought in because they might not at some positions have the same high-end talent, but they do have more bodies last year that are capable of contributing.
Yeah, that was really exciting to see. Another really interesting defensive wrinkle that we saw was on the 2 deep, and on the 2 deep this week as well, they're a 4-3 defense. So you got 4 defensive linemen, defensive end, tackle, defensive end. And then the 3 is the linebackers, of course. You got an outside linebacker, your middle linebacker, and an outside linebacker. That's kind of like the old school typical way of doing defense. What we've seen out of JMU under Bryant Haynes and the defense of Cignetti was more of a 4-2-5 defense where you have 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, 5 defensive backs. In a 4-3, you only have 4 defensive backs. You got 2 corners and 2 safeties. There were times that they would show a 4-2-5 defense out there. So you'd have 4 down linemen, you'd have 2 linebackers and 5 guys in the secondary. Typically that 5th secondary guy was DJ Barksdale, who had a really, really good game. But then it was a really interesting wrinkle because then they'd have Kyrie Mans who would be up. He never got down in the 3-point stance. So it was almost like they were running a 3-3-5, and then they would either drop Mans back into coverage or they'd blitz Mans. And so that was just a really interesting wrinkle that Lyle Hemphill utilized almost throughout the game. I don't think I ever saw maybe 1 or 2 snaps, but not a lot of plays where they ran that 4-3 defense. It was a lot of plays where they were showing maybe a 4-2-5 type of play. And then once the ball was snapped, Mans kind of did his own thing and turned it into a 3-3-5 type of play. So just maybe a little too nerdy there, but I loved that. That is a cool wrinkle that I don't think we ever really saw out of Curt Cignetti. And that's a wrinkle that I'm really excited to see as we move on. Now, what Bennett said, where when there's Weathersby and Torres Jones, Torres Jones is going to blitz because Weathersby's the better coverage guy. I'm excited to see how they start to do that and how they start to kind of change those wrinkles. And even offensively, when Logan Kyle's in, it's going to be a pass to Logan Kyle. When it's Logan Kyle and Taylor Thompson, for a fact it's going to be a pass because Taylor Thompson and Logan Kyle are more wide receivers than they are anything else. But we saw a lot of interesting wrinkles from the defense being a 4-3 on paper, showing 4-2-5 at times. And then once the snap happens, going to a 3-3-5. I think that's going to really spin some quarterbacks' heads in the Sun Belt. But that was a really cool wrinkle. Sometimes Logan Kyle was lining up more as a wide receiver. So was Taylor Thompson. That's a really cool wrinkle. It will be interesting to see now, how do they start to break the tendencies that they've already created through the Charlotte game?
I think North Carolina is going to have a brutal time on tape, given the rotations. Like, they're going to be looking at a lot of different players. I'll give you a guess here. How many guys on JMU's team do you think had a tackle on Saturday against Charlotte?
15.
27.
What?
Including like specials, but 27 is crazy. And my guy, Eric O'Neill, didn't even have a tackle. 27 tackles. My guy wasn't there. My defensive end.
He was looking good, though. I know at times you were like, he doesn't have a tackle. What are we doing? Come on, Eric O'Neill. He was pushing the pocket. He was getting Max Brown out of there.
He started to make a bigger impact as the game went on, which I think is probably due to him being fresh. But that was crazy to think of. That's a lot of people with tackles. 27.
Didn't he play like the most snaps out of everyone?
I thought he did. Yeah, he played a lot of defensive snaps. But their box score is different than the initial box score I saw too, where like JMU saying Mans had 6 tackles. I thought I saw that he had 8 after the game, but maybe not.
I thought he had 8 too. I mean, mainly because that's what you told me.
Well, there you go. But they got a lot of depth. It's going to make it hard for UNC to prepare because I don't think that JMU is going to show much against Gardner-Webb.
I also do want to shout out Jacob Thomas.
He good.
Looked very good.
Yep.
Highest rated group of 5 safety according to PFF from this last week.
Yep.
I was a little worried about Jacob Thomas coming into this season, but he shut me up very quickly. 6 total tackles, 1.5 TFLs. He had a quarterback hurry on that touchdown pass. If Max Brown held onto that pass for a beat longer,
yes,
he was getting strip sacked because Jacob Thomas came flying in off the edge, just half a step behind where Max Brown was. That would have been fun. That would have been because he clobbered Max Brown.
He really did. Yeah, I was impressed with Thomas. I was impressed with a lot of the guys. They forced 3 turnovers as a team, which I think was the most they did in any game last year. Did that a couple times. So that Lyle Hemphill defense, I think they're going to rotate a lot. I think they're going to make some plays. They're probably going to give up more like yards per carry because they're going to be like a normal defense this year. But they were good. I thought they were really good across the board. They might not have the same like get off the bus, oh my God, look at how big they are that Charlotte had defensively. But a few of the guys looked the part on the defensive line. I thought Lloyd Summerall was like, oh, that guy's got to be on the field more. Was my initial takeaway. He clearly looks like a guy who's been a few years at Florida. He's a large dude and was impactful.
He's going to be very good.
Yes. He's a good player. And then Mans, to see him play the way that he did, I think he was their highest graded defender, was awesome. Kai Holmes, I thought, did some nice things. Dobbs didn't even have a huge game, but he was kind of around.
He was always there.
Chauncey Logan, I thought, was all right. Some people were maybe concerned that he was getting picked on in the second half a little bit, but they were trying to keep everything in front of them. So I thought he did well too. They just have so many bodies and guys who can contribute. I wonder if they're going to slim down the rotation at some point. But hey, they've got a lot of guys who can play at a really high level, which is good.
I was talking about this when you froze. I don't know if you heard it, where I was saying they have the 4-3 defense, and then they were running more of a 4-2-5 type of defense. That was more of a 3-3-5 defense.
Yeah.
But not to get back into those weeds. But DJ Barksdale was that fifth guy in the secondary they brought in. DJ Barksdale was second on the team with 68 snaps.
Barksdale also hits very hard. Like, I didn't realize how. What did he list him at? He's like 5'9", 175.
He's very good.
He's athletic and can hit. So he's a fun one that they can do some stuff with. And then you just have guys who are like very experienced with Chris Sheeran and Ray Williams from Howard. Like, they've got a lot of experience in that back end. I think Ja'Kai Young got a few snaps. So they've definitely got some guys who can make plays.
Ja'Kai Young, according to PFF, got one snap. Not to correct you live, but
I thought he was in there more, but I must have just seen 19 once and been like, there he is, and assumed he played more. But all right, they got him in there. He's like the nickel kind of, but I guess he's competing with Barksdale a little bit. So Barksdale might kind of have the edge on him there.
Barksdale, yeah. KJ Flo got in for 9 snaps as well later on in the game. I'm just looking at some of the guys that recorded snaps. 28 different players recorded a defensive snap.
That's crazy.
That's a lot of players. Of that, 22 players recorded at least double-digit snaps.
Yeah, they were really using different guys.
Of that, 18 recorded 20 or more snaps. That is a lot.
It's a different look than last year. It's a different strategy. There's a lot of things that Chesney does that are different than Cignetti, and it's not that either one is necessarily better or worse. But I'm interested to see how Chesney's style translates over the course of a season. His fourth down aggressiveness, I thought, was phenomenal.
Oh, let's talk about it.
They go for it twice on 4th and goal. Didn't score either time, but I like the decision making. They had another 4th down where they drew an offsides and then hit Cam Ross for like a 40-yard pass. So they were 1 for 3 on 4th down, but going for it on like 4th and goal from the 4 is something Cignetti never would have done, or at least rarely. He typically would take the 3 points there.
Also, analytically speaking, like, that is the right play to make. And
especially if you're inside the 5, so it's almost like a 2-point conversion, which the idea is, right, that you're going to get 50% of those, right? So then if you
convert at a 50% rate, you're actually putting an extra point on the board.
Assuming the extra point doesn't blast off the upright. But yeah, exactly.
Shout out Noe Ruelas for having the biggest hit. He had that big hit on the kickoff return, but you mentioned it. Tim Emery also texted me this. Yeah. I hope it was because he hit the crossbar so hard.
I think it was. So that's Chesney's got these weekly awards, and the hardest hit went to Noe, the kicker. And I was like, oh my God, was that the extra point that he missed off the upright? Chesney was like glowing about him in a press conference about the actual tackle. So he said that he blew through a lead blocker and then knocked the guy down, and that led to the tackle. And if that didn't happen, he thought the kickoff could have went for a touchdown. So it wasn't the extra point, which is disappointing to hear.
Yeah, sure it wasn't. Publicly, he has to hype up his kicker behind closed doors. Nice one, Noe.
Exactly. But no, I mean, like, the 4th down aggressiveness I thought was smart. I think it makes sense. He said that it shows trust in the offense, which is cool. But I like the idea of being aggressive in certain spots and trying to score touchdowns instead of field goals. And it's not always going to work out, right? The results won't always be perfect, but I think the process there makes a lot of sense, especially in like modern football. So I think Chesney is maybe a little more analytically driven than Cignetti, which I think at times hurt JMU the last couple of years.
Yeah. Didn't really necessarily hurt them in terms of like wins and losses.
Right.
But kind of like would hurt their overall like point. Like, they could have scored so many more points under Kurt Cignetti if they were just a smidge more aggressive.
Yeah.
I mean, and the play calls were good. Like, Granted, the first fourth down that they had inside the 5 probably shouldn't have gotten to a fourth down. Like, you got to
Yeah.
punch that in. You had 3 running plays
Yeah.
with a bowling ball back there in Io Adei. You got to hope that one of those gets in. So you don't want to get to fourth down, but they did. It was a good – George Pettaway was open. Unfortunately, that was early on in the game. Barnett was still getting his sea legs, and I think he just completely stared down George Pettaway.
Yeah, I think
resulting in a swatted ball.
Defensive lineman tracked that a little bit.
So I think there was another one where Barnett just like stared down his receiver the entire way, and it got batted. And it's like, okay, that's something to work on. Maybe look off guys, but that's nitpicky. He looked good overall. But that one was a good play call. And then like the wheel route to Logan Kyle at the far side pylon.
He had it in his hands.
I guess it was the near side on the broadcast, the near side pylon. Great play call. If he makes that catch, great play, perfectly placed ball. Just, couldn't come down with the ball.
Yeah, so I don't hate either of those decisions. Maybe that's the watching a lot of Dan Campbell, but I like it when coaches are aggressive on fourth down. So I like that a lot from Chesney. I think that's a good sign moving forward. And yeah, I think they got to execute better on those plays, but the idea of going for it on fourth, trying to score touchdowns is a good thing. And I think it'll pay off too when they play games or play teams like North Carolina, where you don't really have a ton to lose in that game. So I think they'll be very aggressive against the Tar Heels.
Can I bring up something to you that we've talked about, but I just want to get it out there on the podcast?
Yeah.
Why did it feel like they couldn't sustain drives?
I don't know, because they had a few drives that ended up being kind of – I think it's because it was more so instead of like – so they would have a drive that was like 7 plays, 59 yards, and it wasn't like 8 yards, 12 yards, 7 yards, 6 yards. It was like 42 yards, 3 yards, 4 yards. Like they were hitting a ton of chunk plays.
Okay, so I'm not crazy in thinking like that is something I want to see out of the Gardner-Webb game. Less chunk. Here, this is also very nitpicky, and like they won the game by 23 points. Clearly what they did worked. They wore down Charlotte. Their game plan looked like it came to fruition. And now this is me being nitpicky. But against Gardner-Webb, I'd like to see more sustained drives of like 5 yards, 6 yards, 2 yards, 10 yards. Something a little bit more sustained, not like chunk, no gain, chunk, no gain, chunk, which it felt like it was at times. Also, I just like to see more diverse play calling because especially early on in the first half, I don't know if it was the game plan to slowly get Alonzo acclimated to the game, but it felt like it was a lot of run, pass, pass, run.
Yeah, I thought that the play calling got better as the day went on, for sure.
Much better.
So they weren't actually that successful. Like their success rate wasn't the best. Now we're really getting into our nerdy stuff. But they they were successful on 39% of their offensive plays.
40th percentile, so not good. Below average.
No, below average. Yards per play, they were elite. Yards per drop back, they were elite. 95th percentile there. Explosive play rate, 85th percentile. So they're really explosive. But they did pretty well defensively to keep Charlotte from doing much of anything. But sustained drives would be cool.
Yeah, defensively they were great. They held Charlotte to negative 0.23 EPA per play, which is bottom quarter percentile, just not allowing them to do anything. They held Charlotte to just a 29% success rate. They held Charlotte to just 4.24 yards per play. That's 11th percentile in week 1. I mean, they did exactly what they needed to do defensively against Charlotte, which has seemed to be the MO for JMU all of these years, that defense. Typically, the offense plays a little bit better. It is week 1. It is a completely new coaching staff. It is a completely new team. It wasn't a raucous place. It was against a good Charlotte defense. So it's really promising that their yards per play were so good. Their yards per drop back. I think the issue is they lacked any sort of run game. 0.03 EPA per rush, and that just really constrained the offense to where they had to rely on these chunk plays. They had to rely on a 12% explosive play rate, which is astronomically high. One of every 9 plays was a explosive play, which is a play that gains more than 20 yards.
They were putting up some huge chunk plays. So if they can have some more sustained drives, get the running game going, that'll be huge. And then Charlotte's defense, I really think is legit. So I think we're going to look back on that and be like, you know what? That was a pretty solid week 1 performance.
Stop rate, JMU's stop rate against Charlotte was a 78% stop rate.
That's impressive.
Which just means, like, how often did you just completely destroy them?
Yeah, Charlotte was not able to do much of anything on offense, which is a great sign.
Here's where the game was won for JMU, though. Have you ever heard of the middle eight?
Yes, Chesney, actually, I thought you would appreciate this, mentioned the middle eight in like a post-game interview. I think it was with Riggert.
That's amazing because their middle eight was phenomenal. During the middle eight, which is the final 4 minutes of the second quarter and the first 4 minutes of the third quarter, JMU ran 7 plays with a 4.02 total EPA, 0.57 EPA per play, which is 0.58 more than their average for the entire game. They ran 3 passes, 4 rushes, 2 successful passes, no successful runs. But that's besides the point. Mainly the reason that looks so good is because of that huge pass to Dollison on the first pass play of the third quarter. But offensively, they did what they needed to do. Defensively, Charlotte ran 12 plays in the middle eight. JMU's defense held them to negative 0.12 EPA per play.
Yeah, I think Petaway was in, right? His touchdown, I think, was in the middle eight, too, at the end of the first half.
Yes.
So they end the first half with a touchdown to Petaway, start the second half with a touchdown to Dollison. They won the coin toss, deferred. So I think all of that was like strategic, worked well, they executed, and they kind of took control of the game there. And then you add in the Jacob Thomas on the 3rd and 25, where Dobbs was off the field and Hendrick was off the field to prevent a touchdown and let the defense sort of settle in again was huge, was really huge. So I thought it was a pretty solid week 1 performance. I know we're the negative guys, but there's a lot to like, a lot to build off of. And I do think they should be able to make some decent improvements here with Gardner Webb and then a bye week. They should be able to really find some areas where they want to get better and get better going into Carolina.
Yeah, I'm excited for that North Carolina game because I think they have a legit chance to win that game.
I do as well. And I think Charlotte playing North Carolina will lead to some interesting film here this week for the Dukes to dive into during their bye.
So I'm trying to find North Carolina in Phil Steele's.
Backup quarterback now. We'll see how that goes.
This is great podcasting.
There's I think they're a solid ACC team, but they're certainly beatable. The change of quarterback changes a lot. JMU should be really healthy going into that one.
The one bummer is that UNC will also be coming off of a bye week heading into that game.
They got an FCS game, right?
NC Central.
Yeah, so they're kind of just going through the motions.
And Charlotte before that.
Charlotte's defense, man. I'm interested to see if they can mess with the backup quarterback.
I'll be interested to see if they can slow down Hampton.
Or if they can move the ball even a little bit.
Yeah. But I think if you were worried watching that game, that's very valid.
Yeah.
I do recommend going back and rewatching the broadcast if you're that much of a sicko and you want to do that, because that's what Bennett and I both did, and we left being like, oh, we're fine. It was first week jitters. And you tweeted something out too. The other Sun Belt coaches who are in their first year all did not suffer the same fate of winning. A lot of them lost.
Very hard. Like Troy lost to Nevada and might just be bad without Summerall, which is like hard. Man, like Troy was toward the class of the Sun Belt. Yeah, that really, really good Sun Belt team. Playing great the last few years with John Summerall leading the program. He leaves to Tulane. And then Troy seems to have taken a bit of a step back, where JMU, maybe they're taking a step back, but Chesney seems like he has them ready to go playing at a high level. So a lot of positives to take from it. There's a couple injuries that I think will be helpful if they can get those guys healthy. Tyshawn Wyatt at left tackle would be huge if he's available for North Carolina. Not listed on the 2 deep this week against Gardner Webb. And then Taji Hudson did not play at receiver against Charlotte. It would be nice to get him healthy here soon, whether he goes against Gardner Webb or Carolina. He's one that they've said a lot of nice things about.
Can I say something that might be mean?
Yeah.
Bob Chesney does not respect the 2 deep.
Yeah, he's just throwing it out there.
They didn't run a 4-3 defense. That was not their base defense. That's what he's showing on the 2 deep. Just saying screw it to that. And then Taji was injured, but Dylan Williams was on there as Cam Ross's backup. We never saw Dylan Williams one. Yeah. He just said screw it. Brandon Fike I got to check the pronunciation guide on that. He's listed as the backup to Jacob Dobbs. He only had like 5 snaps.
Yeah, they really go with those. They've got that group of like 5 linebackers, and he's definitely the 6th based on the rotation.
That's all. I mean, I respected all this quote unquote gamesmanship and stuff, but he doesn't even respect his own 2 deep.
Yeah, it's definitely a loose guide with Bob.
I'm shocked that we didn't just have 22 oars.
Still some oars, right? Or at least one oar. They had O'Neal and Summerall as an oar.
Yeah.
Going into this week, yeah.
Were you shocked that Terry Lockett only had 11 snaps?
No, it seems like some of the other defensive tackles have maybe made a little bit of a bigger name, but he'll play a role, I think.
Yeah. All right. You ready for your favorite segment?
Let's do it.
Before we get to listener questions, we got News or Snooze, presented by Cinnamon Bear. Check them out. Shout out Cinnamon Bear. Check them out right across the street from the Atlantic Union Bank Center, right there next to Costco, the Sheets area. You know where I'm talking about. Fantastic place. Go check out Cinnamon Bear the next time you're in Harrisonburg. Let's get to some News or Snooze.
Okay. No quotes this week. I'll have quotes next week. This week, I'm going to give you 3 statements, and I want you to tell me whether you think it's newsworthy or snoozeworthy. First one, kickoffs. We talked about the coverage. They also rotated who was doing kickoffs. So they had Noe and then Cristiano Rosa do some as well. Newsworthy or snoozeworthy that they were not only rotating on defense and offense, but they were rotating kickoff specialists.
Again, Chesney, no respect to the 2 deep because there was no or there. How was I supposed to expect that Rosa was going to be doing kickoff duties? Neither one of them made it to the end zone. And Noe has a leg. So I'm very curious if that's by design to not allow them to take the touchback and take it to the 25, where you have enough faith in your kickoff coverage unit to tackle them before the 25, which seems like a very Chesney analytically driven type of decision. With that being said, Noe limped off the field after his big hit. So I was wondering if they may have just saved his leg.
Why. But yeah, that would make sense. He also said that Chesney in one post-game interview, I can't remember exactly where it was, that Rosa should be handling those and should be putting them through the end zone, was like what he implied. He was like, yeah, we just need Cristiano to execute and we'll get some touchbacks. And I was like, what? All right. So I'm very interested to see what they do with
because Ruelas is still the starting kickoff specialist on the 2 deep.
It's confusing. I was confused by what happened.
Both of them should be able to kick it through the back of the end zone, which is why I assumed it was like by design.
Which maybe it was. He just doesn't want to say it, but who knows? Okay. Number 2.
So that's newsworthy.
All right. Taji Hudson not playing week 1.
I'm going to say newsworthy. This is a guy who came into the year with 9 career catches, was never really fully healthy last year, kind of coming into this year. Health was a question mark around the quote unquote wide receiver 1. Yeah. He misses the first game because he wasn't feeling 100% during warmups, which tells me he was either sick or he suffered an injury during game week that he tried to work through during warmups and felt like he couldn't go. Reason I think it's more so the latter right there. He had a huge brace on his knee.
It was large. Yeah.
So that worries me a lot. So that makes this newsworthy. I do kind of have a little bit of snoozeworthy creeping in here as well, though, because Barnett has a connection with Dollison. That is the connection that I thought McLeod and Dollison was going to have last season.
Me too, right? Former teammates.
Yeah,
former USF. Teammate.
Yeah. But that never came to fruition. But it seems like Barnett and him, and that's a match made in heaven. One of the best deep balls I've ever seen in person to one of the fastest receivers in the Sun Belt. That's going to cause some headache. Cam Ross looked really good. Breon Penny had a catch. You got to expect Dylan Williams will get in there as well. Logan Kyle, Taylor Thompson. They have an embarrassment of riches at the pass catching position. So it is newsworthy that Taji Hudson did not play, and we did not hear anything about it in pregame or postgame. We heard about it at the Sun Belt coaches call. That's newsworthy, but I'm not too worried if he misses a few weeks.
I think that's fair. All right. Last one here. Tyshawn Wyatt not appearing on the 2 deep again. Newsworthy or snoozeworthy?
Snoozeworthy. I think it's kind of expected. I talked with him at JMU Football Media Day, and he was just mentioning I mean, he had a really bad injury.
Yeah.
I mean, that was if you got our JMU football master guide, you can listen to the entire Tyshawn Wyatt interview over at buymeacoffee.com/JMU Sports News. But kind of given a peek behind the curtain on that interview, he said he had to work back to get quad function. He had to just make sure that his quad worked. So, I mean, it was a gruesome injury, happened late in the season last year around Halloween. And so, what, a 9-month-ish recovery period? He's right up on that now. So, not only do you have to come back from that, you have to get back into football shape. You have to be ready to start a full FBS game at left tackle. So if he's not there for the UNC game, because that's about 3 weeks away, I'd be a little worried. But as of right now, it's newsworthy.
Do you think he will be ready for UNC?
Yes.
I think so too. I feel like that's probably what they targeted coming into the year.
Yeah.
All right. Couple newses, couple snoozes.
I like it. And before we wrap up the JMU Sports News Podcast presented by BetOnline, we're going to go to some quick listener questions. Not a lot of them, but
yeah,
gotta hit the old listener questions. Thank you to everyone who put in a listener question. You can follow us at JMU Sports News on X, formerly Twitter, if you still call it Twitter. We post before every podcast recording. Any questions, drop them below. So be sure to follow along over there on X/Twitter if you want to get your questions in. So we have about 9 questions.
Wow.
Which was a lot considering this morning we woke up to 3.
9 questions. Good job, everyone.
JMU Dukes 0608. Who impressed the most on defense other than Dobbs? I'm going to say I don't think Dobbs Dobbs was good, but I didn't leave the game going, wow, Jacob Dobbs' performance was out of this world.
Me neither. I'll steal yours from earlier and say Jacob Thomas. I thought was really good.
Copycat, man.
I know.
Copycat.
I also did not expect Mans to be that disruptive in game 1.
I'm going to say Mans because Mans' ability to not only blitz off the edge, but then drop into coverage and really disguise some stuff. He didn't look necessarily the most comfortable in kind of Amar Thomas also did this a lot. So him and Amar Thomas both kind of had this role.
Yeah.
As Mans develops and figures out more and more like the vibe of the Lyle Hemphill defense, I think he might be scary good.
Me too.
Hard-hitting question from Joey Needham. Does Barnett have aura?
He might, man. That flop was fun. His flop that went viral was very fun. He had some confidence. He was holding some like first down celebration poses for a very long time. He's got some confidence to him. It's cool to see him have a chance to actually show it this year.
Would you say he has Riz?
Sure.
Yeah, the first down he pointed at was like held so long.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm overthinking the whole flop thing. But that just shows like where he is at mentally to have that much fun on the football field. Less than 365 days from being benched and going through maybe one of the hardest times of his young life to then a year later on the football field, just completely flop around and have fun and just like know that he's the guy. That was cool to see.
Yeah, he's going to be a fun one. I think JMU fans are going to quickly fall in love with this game
if they have not already.
Yeah.
Austin Logan, when will we ever get the black unis in college football 25? Man, I sure as hell hope so. They're playing every game in their black uniforms.
That's right.
Especially against teams who have black as their primary color.
You see the Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky uniform beef?
Yeah.
Very weird.
It's so good. In case you haven't seen it, Western Kentucky wanted to wear their white jerseys for their home opener and do a full whiteout, but Eastern Kentucky went into the NCAA uniform rule book and exercised their right as the visiting team to wear white. Normally
ruining the whiteout, right?
Ruining the whiteout. Normally, the visiting team will accept it. Like JMU wouldn't have been able to wear white against Charlotte for their Gold Rush game.
Right.
Because it's too close to gold. But JMU was like, okay, we'll wear our purples. Typically, that's how it goes. You kind of give the home team the choice. Western Kentucky was hoping to get that same sort of respect from Eastern Kentucky, and Eastern Kentucky, in this rivalry, decided to say, no, we want to we love our white jerseys that much. We want to wear them against you.
Objectively very funny.
Very, very funny. But will we ever get black uniforms? Maybe. Streamers might be coming soon too. Who knows? They're releasing updates almost every week. I think 2 weeks ago they released the roster update to include George Pettaway, and boy is he good. They got his year wrong, so you have him longer.
Oh, we like that.
Very much so. Caleb, does JMU give Dylan Morris reps if a blowout starts to form against Gardner-Webb?
That's a great question. I don't know if they do, because I don't know if they want the chatter. I would. If you're blowing him out, I would give Dylan, assuming he's like fully healthy and ready to go, I would give him some reps. But I wonder if they I don't know. I assume that a backup will play. I just don't know if it'll be Dylan or Billy.
Or Griffiths or Kendall.
Right.
We'll see.
Or I guess you could play Evans if you wanted to.
That's true. Oh, he did mention J.C. Evans kind of in passing. Bob Chesney, one of the post-game interviews. I think J.C. Evans might be quarterback 3.
He's got some game. We'll see.
So, yeah, we'll see. 2025 basketball class recap. Spradlin is on fire.
Yeah, what? What is this man doing?
JMU got Preston Fowler, a 4-star recruit. He has become now, with his commitment, the highest ranked JMU men's basketball recruit in program history.
Yeah.
And then what did they do to back it up? Oh, they got another small forward, a 6'8" small forward out of Tennessee, Christian Brown, a 3-star prospect who's the highest rated recruit in the state of Tennessee.
Both really, really good players, really talented. He's got some other like 4 stars that are looking at the program too. I don't know how he's doing it. I imagine the collective is helping. I imagine Preston Spradlin.
I think Preston Spradlin's a very good recruiter.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. They went from being like a dumpster fire of a program to a 30-plus win season, NCAA tournament win, and now like just absurd recruiting growth.
And then, oh, by the way, they're transfer recruits for this season because Christian Brown and Preston Fowler won't be here until next November.
2025, yeah.
Oh, by the way, they just landed one of the top recruits, transfer recruits from like the mid-major ranks in Mark Freeman. Oh, by the way, AJ Smith, an OVC like first-team player, right?
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Ebenezer Dewana. Oh, by the way, Elijah Hutchins Everett, 2 7-footers that come from P5 programs. Or like high major programs.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Xavier Brown's back. Oh, by the way, they got the Syracuse transfer, Justin Taylor.
Some other guys, man. Anderson, D2 All-American. They got it's a loaded roster, and they're doing some great stuff in the high school ranks too.
Insane. This is from @Tofus0up. What is your dream? What is your dream, and B, realistic ceiling for Alonzo Barnett if he stays at JMU his whole career, given that he's a redshirt sophomore?
Huh.
I think your take from last year still applies.
That like the people who are starting at his age are like he would be a generationally great JMU quarterback. Yeah, I think that's the realistic is that he like if he stays his whole career, he should set records because he would have 3 starting seasons?
He would set like every record in the record book.
You think there'd be some records set, and then like dream is like that the dude like wins the Heisman or is like a fringe Heisman contender.
That's the dream. I think realistic is that he just becomes a very good quarterback and like sets some records.
If he is committed to staying too and has like a great season, becomes a lot easier to recruit in the portal, in high school, especially the portal though, where it's like, hey, we have a dude at quarterback. We're like our floor is much, much higher just because we're great at that most important position on the field. So if you can start to add guys around him, it gets pretty intense quickly.
Which they're going to have to do because a large portion of this roster are seniors. But you saw what happened with App State. They didn't lose a lot of transfers in this offseason because they kept Joey Aguilar and their head coach. Yep. But, I mean, they kept a Sun Belt preseason offensive player of the year, mainly because I think that the Sun Belt just kind of forgot Jordan McLeod was still there over in Texas State.
That doesn't make any sense.
I think that's besides.
Dude got snubbed.
I think they forgot he was there.
Silly.
Whatever. But, I mean, yeah, dream Heisman, realistic, very, very good. If he's the starter for realistic ceiling, starter for 3 seasons, set some records.
Yeah.
Mainly because of just pure volume.
Right.
JMU underscore 71. Will we see Dylan Morris in the second half? Will we see Billy at all? I honestly think I know we talked about this 5 minutes ago. I think it's more likely we see Billy than Dylan Morris.
Yeah.
JMU underscore 71 also said, I know it's football season and I'm a former player, but y'all have to talk about the 2 recruiting wins Spradlin had this week. We just talked about dogs. Like you're right, JMU underscore 71. That is something that it's not often that in the middle of football season or at the beginning of football season, we're talking about recruiting wins in the high school ranks for men's basketball for the class of the following year. Fantastic stuff from Preston Spradlin.
He's good at recruiting, and I think developing a team and coaching.
Yeah, that part too.
He's good at all of it.
Because Penny Hardaway is a really good recruiter, but has not been able to put it together.
No, he's a violation machine.
He's a violation machine, and he's losing like all of his coaches. Thomas at Dookie 95. Best viral moment. The Zoe flop. Also, can we talk? How does Alonza become Zoe?
I don't know.
Because it's Alonza. Very weird. Zoe flop or Sig phone. I think it's the Zoe flop. That went more viral. It went across more timelines, Twitter timelines, Instagram timelines. I think the Signetti phone was really funny for us and maybe some of the college football sickos out there, but it didn't seem to get the same amount of run as this Alonza Barnett flop. So I'm going to go Alonza Barnett. Bennett froze out of here. We're not going to wait for him to come back. We're just going to end this episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the JMU Sports News Podcast presented by Bet Online. We'll be back next week around Wednesday or Thursday. We got to iron out some of the scheduling details for next week. But in the meantime, you can follow us at JMU Sports News on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook and YouTube. And you can check out our home on the web, www.jmusportsnews.com. All of those links are down in our episode description. Hopefully, we'll be back next week with a live stream as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week for the JMU Sports News Podcast.